So we aim to push the boundaries. They range across all of the sciences, and today's lecture is no exception. So regulars will know that the origin of life is a recurring theme in these Coffee and Beyond lectures. There are many outstanding problems in the origin of life, but in the opinion of many, the really critical transition from non-life to life was the emergence of digital coded information processing. And it's here where the world of physics and chemistry and biology intersects that of mathematics and computing. So it's refreshing today to get a communication engineer's take on the nature of this problem. Perry Marshall is graduated in electrical engineering, that's his background. He's now a business consultant in Chicago. He's written books on marketing, advertising, and one on the Ethernet, which is in its 3rd edition, is that right? And most recently, a book with the provocative title, Evolution 2.0. Today's lecture is unusual for us because it will be accompanied by the announcement of an Origin of Life prize. Stay tuned. The title of the lecture you'll see behind me, Origin of Life, Evolution of Digital Code. We have about 1 hour to complete this. So Perry, thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. When I was 14 years old, I was living in Lincoln, Nebraska. I grew up in a very conservative Christian community, and my dad was a minister, and the church that I went to was had a little break from their excruciating exegesis of Greek and Hebrew and such, and brought in a special speaker. His name was John Whitcomb, and he was a creation scientist, and he didn't just come once, he came every night for a week. And I've been a science geek since as long as I can remember, and he delivered this fascinating series of talks explaining how the Earth was 6,000 years old, and he introduced an idea called flood geology, which is that all of the features of the Earth, including this beautiful Grand Canyon that you see here, can all be explained through 40 days and 40 nights of Noah's flood. And this was a lot more interesting to me than what they normally talked about, and so I was enthralled, and I thought it was great, and I got answers to a whole bunch of really difficult questions. But as time went on, I eventually got an electrical engineering degree, and I learned a lot about physics and a lot about the speed of light and a lot of things, and I started seeing some cracks in this view of the world. There just seemed to be certain things that didn't add up. Now, at this point in time, there was no big crisis about this. There was just kind of the lingering accumulation of doubts as to whether this really made sense. Well, fast forward a few years, I got out of college, and I listened to this lecture by a guy named Hugh Ross, who was an astrophysicist. And he explained, I think one of the most interesting things he explained was, this was the mid to early 90s, and the Hubble telescope had just been sent out, and there was a ton of information coming from that. It was all over the magazines and newspapers, and I began learning about something that our friend Paul Davies here calls the Goldilocks Enigma, which is if all of the constants in the universe, like the charge of an electron or the mass of a proton or the expansion rate of the Big Bang, if all those were on dials, then if you messed with any of the dials at all, you'd get a big catastrophe, and you probably wouldn't even get a universe at all. And the tuning, in some cases, was to 120 decimal places. And this was just like absolutely, I mean, if I thought what the guy at my church, if I had thought that was interesting, now this was interesting, okay? And what I ended up doing was trading my young earth creationism for a fine-tuned universe. and discovering that, you know, you could literally look at a telescope and you could see 10 billion years into the past and you could witness the birth of our universe. And I was fascinated, and suddenly, like, well, what's the problem here? Like, this is fine. You know, science and my religious beliefs, like, I don't see a problem with this. In fact, it's more amazing than I had ever realized before. So like I said, I made a trade, and I was very happy to do it. Well, fast forward a few years, and my younger brother, his name is Brian. He's one of the smartest people I know. He's also the president of my company now. Brian had gotten a degree in seminary and moved to China, where he was teaching English and he was doing missionary work on the side. And he was there for 4 years. And during the space of that 4 years, he went from more conservative than me, kind of right-wing sort of Christian guy, to almost an atheist. And we were very close, and he would email all of these questions. Now, I thought that I had had a lot of conversations about such things, and I thought I knew a lot of stuff, but you have not had a theological argument until you've had it with a guy who knows Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic, and has spent 4 years of his life digging through, you know, the back alleys of the Old Testament. And Brian had all of these questions, and I was kind of drowning. And I went to visit him in China, and we're in this bus that you see, if you can call that a bus. We were on this little trip in the foothills of the Himalayas, and we're arguing again. Like, this is argument number 237 at this point, and I just am finding myself retreating to what I know best, which is science. And I said, Brian, okay, I said, look at the hand at the end of your arm. I said, this is a fine piece of engineering, and I've been doing engineering for a long time. I said, you don't think this is a result of a random series of accumulated accidents, do you? And he's like, hold on, buddy, hold on. And he pushes back with a kind of classic neo-Darwinian explanation. He says, listen, Perry, you know, let's say there's a billion falcons flying around in millions and millions of years. He goes, and every now and then there's going to be a copying error in the DNA. And every now and then the copying error is going to be better, not worse, and it can see better, it can hunt better, and then it outlasts the other falcons, and the falcons get better and better and better and better. No designer necessary. Well, I wasn't sure if I really believed that or not, but without even going any further in the argument, I knew a few things. I knew that most biologists would probably more agree with him than me. And the other thing I knew from getting an electrical engineering degree is there are a lot of things in science that are very counterintuitive. You know, in electrical engineering we have imaginary numbers, and they turned out to be very useful, and I would have never guessed, but it turns out that it's true. And so I thought, well, I don't know, maybe there's some kind of like imaginary numbers in biology, and maybe you don't need to design things. Maybe they just really do get better and better. But I'm going to find out. I don't know. So do the biologists know something the engineers don't know? Do the engineers know something the biologists don't know? I knew that in 5.5 years of electrical engineering school, the random mutation and natural selection as a way to optimize system was never brought up. I couldn't recall it ever. And so I was really good. So I went home, and I have an obsessive personality. Most entrepreneurs do. I was like, man, I'm digging into this. I'm buying books on Amazon. I'm visiting websites. I'm sure Amazon stock is probably going up. I mean, I am into this. And I was lost. I mean, like, wow. I thought electromagnetic fields and waves was complicated, but man, this is hideous. And I just like, is there any way I can even touch the bottom of the swimming pool? Where do you start with this stuff? You know, because I just plunged my way in. And so I was looking for something that I could grab onto where, okay, this is a principle that I can start with some kind of basic principle and I could work my way there. And if Brian's really right, if like falcons could have DNA copying errors and their eyes get better, if that's really true, I want to know how that works, because in engineering, if we had something like that in engineering, man, that would be really valuable. And so I was on a serious hunt, and I knew what it would feel like if I found it, but I didn't know what it was. Well, so what I decided was this, is I am going to start going and collecting pieces of information, and I'm going to sort of put them on the proverbial chalkboard, and I am going to ignore no verifiable fact. Okay, so if I can verify that it's true, it's going on the board, whether I know what to do with it or not. And this might turn me into an atheist. I don't know. And the idea kind of scared me. It's like, well, things seem to be working okay. Brian and I could go to Thanksgiving next fall, and we could be like the atheists in the room, and everybody could pray to their invisible sky daddy and not realize that it's just paint on the ceiling. There really is nothing else up there, and that we would be smarter than them. And maybe this is going to take me there, or maybe it's going to take me somewhere else. Like, I don't know, but I plunged myself into the void, and I was scared. Like, I don't know where this is going to take me. So, ignore no verifiable fact. Well, one day I was reading about genes, chromosomes, DNA, genetic code, and I had this flash of recognition. Oh my word, I've seen this before. I know what this is. And here's what I saw, okay? So in 2002, I wrote a book called Industrial Ethernet, which, it was New York Times bestseller, went to the top of the charts. No, just kidding. If you can't sleep tonight, this may help. But I wrote it for the world's largest professional organization of process control engineers called the ISA. And it's all about how the ones and zeros go back and forth across the wire. Well, in this diagram up here, this is an Ethernet packet, which is disassembled into TCP/IP packets. And if you want to know anything about how the ones and zeros come into your computer and get unpacked or come through your router or your Wi-Fi and turned into an email or a YouTube video that you can see on your screen, it all happens like this. And you strip things off of one side and the other, and you make these transformations, and there are these certain sections that do certain jobs. So it's going from this place to this other place, and here's the data, and here's the format the data is in. There are error correction systems in here. And I was very familiar with what you see at the top, and what I suddenly saw was that DNA transcription and translation is almost identical. It is digital code, and it obeys the same rules, and it is subject to the same problems. It's subject to copying errors and being corrupted. It has to be protected. It has to be retransmitted if it's not sent successfully. And in about 15 seconds, I had the biggest epiphany I ever had in my life, because suddenly I saw that the digital information age that we all live in, that we're all familiar with, and genetics are both one and the same. Now, there's a lot more to genetics than there is to Ethernet, okay? Don't get me wrong, there's a lot more, but there's not less. And it obeys the same fundamental set of principles. And I said, I can figure this out. Evolution is a software engineering problem. And I know how to break this apart, because it's ones and zeros. And so I was very excited, and I started buying more books and all this kind of stuff. And so that was really amazing. And suddenly I felt like my feet had touched the bottom of the swimming pool. Well, so I'm going to come back around to this in a second, but I had this other question. So what about evolution? Now, if I had just stopped with what I just told you so far, had I not looked any further, I would have come to a seemingly logical conclusion that evolution was impossible, because I immediately knew falcons having DNA copying errors is not going to make them see better. Digital data does not improve when you corrupt it, ever. In fact, it's incredibly fragile. And the fact that you can drive down the expressway and talk on your cell phone or text or watch a YouTube video is an absolute miracle of really brilliant technology that's been invented to circumvent all of the problems and the copying errors. So I would have just become an old Earth creationist, I imagine. But I was finding a lot, and I mean a lot, of anecdotal evidence that evolution was true. Like, for example, whales have these little bones near the back of their bodies, and they look an awful lot like legs, but they're just shrunken down. And, it doesn't look like a way that you would design a whale, but, if you wanted to say, well, I think this evolved from something earlier and this just got squashed down, that would make a lot of sense. And so I saw a lot of merit to the idea that evolution was true, but I could, within my existing engineering knowledge, I couldn't see how do you get there from here. But what I decided to do is, well, all right, so I know about Ethernet and genes and stuff like that, but I also know about things like, whale feet or whale flippers. So I'm just going to hold these things in tension, and I'm going to look for, is there some way to resolve these two verifiable facts that I seem to be looking at? Well, another big epiphany was, it took literally a couple years, but somebody sent me a paper that said, hey Perry, you might find this interesting, and I discovered the world of Barbara Mcclintock. Barbara Mcclintock was a geneticist who, in the 1940s, she was hacking corn plants by hitting them with radiation and breaking chromosomes and seeing what would happen. And she threw this plant a curveball, and the plant threw the curveball right back. And to give you an analogy so she damaged a chromosome and the plant wanted to reproduce and it couldn't do it. And an analogy to what she discovered would be if I took a page out of a mystery novel, if I ripped out page 243, and then I said, hey, you're a good writer, I want you to, you don't know what's on page 243, I want you to read the book before and after, and I want you to reconstruct what you think it says on page 243, and you have to use existing phrases, words, sentences, and paragraphs that you stole from somewhere else in the book. Now, could a good writer do that if they really wanted to? I think they could. That's what Barbara Mcclintock's plant did. And I said, whoa, this is huge. Okay, this is one of those things that maybe the biologists know about, that the engineers don't even know about. And if we knew how to do that, oh my word, what kind of software would we be writing if you could do that? And I believe that Barbara Mcclintock's experiment was the most important experiment in evolution history, because it explained, it at least gave us a view of what is really going on when there's evolutionary events. It's not random. And it's not accidental. It's actually in response to hundreds of inputs from the environment, whether it's temperature or availability of food, nutrients, oxygen, whatever, extremely sophisticated. And I wondered, why isn't anybody talking about this? Why have I not heard about this? I've been digging hard into this subject. And I go to the bookstore and I get these really simplistic explanations from these evolution books about pretty much like what Brian explained to me, and this isn't how it works. Well, fast forward again a little bit. What ended up happening was I traded my creationism for what you might call natural genetic engineering. The amazing capacity of living things to reprogram themselves. So not only does the genome build the organism modifies the genome, and it's a read-write system. It's absolutely incredible. And I thought, this is more amazing than anything either of these two sides were ever telling me. Well, so I was just blown away by all this. And in 2005, I had some friends at Willow Creek, which was, I think still is, the largest church in Chicago. And I was talking to one of my friends there, and he goes, "Man, Perry, this is cool stuff. Like, you should come talk about it." So I went there, and I gave a talk called, "If You Can Read This, I Can Prove God Exists." Now, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, okay? Like, I'm not really saying you can prove God exists, but I had a strong design argument, and the design argument went like this. DNA is code. All of the other codes are designed. Therefore, it sure looks like DNA is designed. Well, so I gave that talk, and we recorded it, and I put it on my website. And at the time, I was doing this experiment. Remember what I said about ignore no verifiable fact? Well, there's kind of another piece of that, which is test whatever you believe to the point of total destruction. Okay? In other words, if I think something is true, can I put it on a big giant anvil in public and let 1 million people pound on it with their hammers, and will it hold together? And so what I had done, I'm a specialist in Google advertising, and back then Google advertising was really cheap. I had this website called cosmicfingerprints.com, and I wrote a series of emails, and some of them talked about this stuff, and they made this argument. And I drove millions of people to this website, and I built an email list of 175,000 people. And anytime somebody would reply to one of the emails, it would come to me, and I would answer any reasonable person. And I said, if anybody can prove me wrong, then I'll change my mind, but I'm going to put this out there, and I'm going to see if this works. And so I put this out there, put this talk, and driving all this traffic to this site, and all these people are coming in. Man, some people got like really upset. They were not happy about this. Some people thought it was great. But anyway, pounding. Well, there was this one guy. It was very obvious early on that he was kind of a flaming nihilistic atheist, and he was really not liking this. And I was backing him into a corner, and he didn't have a counter argument. And so one day he says, "Hey Perry, I posted a link to your site on infidels. So like you go over there and argue with those guys." Well, Infidels was the largest atheist website in the world. And he posted a link. He said, "Hey guys, be nice to this Perry Marshall guy while you rip him to shreds." And so this became the longest running, most viewed thread in the entire history of Infidels. And this went on for 7 years. And what I said to all these people was, show me a code that's not designed, all you need is one. And they never could solve it. And they never had an answer. And it was one of me, and it was tons of them. And I mean, this was scary, okay? It's like, and part of what was going on was, at the time, my career was doing really well. I was selling the world's most popular book on Google advertising. In the business side of the world, everybody loved Perry. But in this side of the world, everybody hated Perry. And there's all these websites, and they're spewing hatred and all this stuff. And I was not enjoying this a bit. But I was managing to defend myself. Well, they never could solve it. Eventually the site got taken down or sold to somebody. Anyway, I only had one frustration. The frustration was I couldn't get this argument to not go around in circles. People wouldn't accept the definitions. And one time I was going back and forth with a guy, and it occurred to me, Perry, you need to tell this guy how to prove you wrong. And so I wrote a specification. I said, here's how you show that you got a naturally occurring code. You got to prove like these 10 things. And I put it up there, and I said, if you can solve this, I'll write you a check for $10,000. And it was over. It just stopped. And suddenly there was no more calling me names or anything like that. All right, so that's nice. But then my brother, Brian, comes into the picture again. And he's like, okay, Perry, that's nice. That's really nice. You're a little rabbit foo-foo, you can bonk the atheist on the head. Good for you. Yay. He goes, but listen, like, if I'm a scientist, what am I going to do? Go, like, God did it, let's go out for a 3-martini lunch? Are we going to transcribe our lunch and submit it as a scientific paper? I mean, come on, like, really? And, like, he was serious. And at first, I didn't totally get what he was talking about. But later, it kind of clicked. It was like, you know, there's a difference between proximal explanations and ultimate explanations, okay? And what I started to realize, especially as I read more and more, and I thought about it, was this is actually a really fundamental question, and nobody knows the answer. Like, for example, there could be an undiscovered law of physics that explains how you get from chemicals to code, how you get from non-information to information. And if you could figure that out, it would be one of the biggest discoveries of the 21st century. And I started to really think about this. And I became less and less sure that this couldn't be solved. And mostly, I started envisioning, well, what if it's solvable? Couldn't you learn more about the universe if this was true than if it isn't? Wouldn't it serve science more if instead of using this as a way of winning debates and winning arguments, if I could use this as a way of furthering science? What if you used religious questions to drive science forward instead of, like, saying hooray every time a scientist can't figure something out? Because there's this real adversarial relationship that a lot of people have towards science, which I think is very damaging. And so what I did was I traded my God of the Gaps argument for a decision to never sweep vital questions under the rug. Well, so when my book Evolution 2.0 came out, I decided to put together a technology prize, and I went and I formed a company and started raising investment money, and I'd like you to watch this video here. Oops.
Press harder.
Hmm?
Press harder on the button.
We're going to watch the video later.
I'm sure it can be
So yeah, we can do that. If you can produce a self-organizing digital communication system with an encoder, a message, and a decoder, we'll write you a check for $100,000. If your process is patentable, then Natural Code LLC will pay for the patent, and we will write you a check for $5 million and partner you into our company. Now, why a prize? Why should you use a technology prize for something like this? Well, first of all, I believe that information is the central question in biology. And biology becomes a lot more comprehensible if you frame it as an information problem rather than just a bunch of chemicals. And again, my Ethernet DNA experience really highlighted that very strongly. Secondly, cells do something that computer programs don't do. So how many of you used DOS back in the day? Okay, DOS operating system. So I want you to imagine that Bill Gates and his friends came out with DOS in 1981, and I want you to imagine that since that time, no programmer's keyboards touched, no hands touched the keyboard to program Windows in Redmond, Washington. And I want you to imagine that DOS developed an Ethernet connection, and it developed a Windows desktop, and it developed Microsoft Word, and it developed Excel, and it developed antivirus software, and it updated the antivirus software all by itself. Now, and then we got to the Windows of today through self-adaptation. Would you be impressed Okay, that's what cells do. That's what biology does. That's why you have to finish your antibiotics. Because if you don't, DOS will evolve into Windows and you're dead. Okay? Absolutely amazing. We don't know how to build systems that do that. What if we did? Now, I don't know, but I suspect that whatever it is that gets you from chemicals to code is also what gets you these higher levels of evolutionary steps. I suspect that there may be something in common with both of those things. Number 3, you throw a steak on the kitchen table and you look at your dog and you go, no, don't eat that steak. And Fido looks at you like, I want to eat the steak. Don't eat the steak. And then you leave the room. Now, when you leave the room, your dog is deciding whether he's going to eat the steak. And when you come back, you may find steak all over the floor and a big mess, or you may find that you had an obedient dog. But the point is the dog decided whether to eat the steak. Now, computer programs don't do that. You tell your computer program to eat the steak or not eat the steak, whatever happens is just going to be whatever the thing was programmed to do. It's completely deterministic. But biological systems make choices, and that's why they're able to create information. I think this is a really important question in even thinking about things like consciousness. Number 4. I believe that a solution to this problem will revolutionize technology and medicine. I think it could be a huge breakthrough for artificial intelligence. I think a company like Google or Intel or Apple would love to have something like this. Maybe it would mean that when you talk to Siri, there's actually somebody in there. I don't know. And medicine. I mean, how could it not? How could it not help us medically? And 5. I think we have a long history of underestimating nature. I was talking a month ago to a young woman who does clinical cancer trials, and she said, you know, those cancer cells are really smart. You do not know what they're going to do back when you do something to them. And I think we're constantly underestimating the intelligence of our opponent. And okay, then there's genome editing. I don't know if all of you know this, but we can now edit genomes at will with CRISPR technology. And I was reading one of the CRISPR authors, and they said, well, we know that evolution occurs through random mutations of genes and natural selection, and now we're going to take control of the evolutionary process for the first time, and that sent chills up and down my spine. Like, no, the evolutionary steps that give falcons better eyes or cause whales' feet to shrink down, these are not random and accidental steps. They are responsive to the environment. They are highly coordinated. If we underestimate the sophistication of nature, it's going to kick back in a really bad way. We have to have respect for what's really going on. So these are the reasons why I think this is really important, and it's not just a conceptual, kind of a thing. No, this is a very fundamental problem in science, and it needs to be looked at very carefully. So, Evolution 2.0 is a book, and it's a prize, but it's also a DMZ. It's a demilitarized zone. What do I mean by that? Well, in North Korea, South Korea, you have this band of land between the two countries where there's no shooting. Right? And where people can talk even though they're on extreme polarized ends of a debate. And what I decided to do was trade the opportunity to punch someone in the face or win an argument for a demilitarized zone. What the Evolution 2.0 prize says is, number 1, we have not solved this problem. And number 2, maybe we can solve this problem, but you can only solve it if you take it seriously and if you look at it. And you have to listen to people and understand what they're saying. And I have read every kind of literature on this topic that I can possibly find from every point of view. And what I have found was that there was genuine value in every corner. The creationists, the atheists, the design theorists, the physicists, the biologists, the doctors, the engineers, the philosophers, they all had something useful to say. And if you labeled them as idiots and you stopped listening to them, then you just shut down the conversation and you reinforce the negativity that there's already too much of this in our culture, and you close off conversation and nobody learns anything and everybody stays in their echo chambers, and that is a very big problem. And so what I want Evolution 2.0 to be is a demilitarized zone where we're not shooting at each other. And we're not just trying to score ego points. So, I had to get some judges for this prize. Well, one of my judges is George Church. George is at Harvard and MIT. He's a co-author of 425 papers, has filed 95 patents. He developed many methods for the first genome sequence, total rock star of genomics, and he was kind enough to join me on the team. Another judge is Dennis Noble from Oxford. He's one of the top 100 scientists in the UK. He is a fellow of the Royal Society, has a commander of the British Empire, a medal from Queen Elizabeth. He's the guy who figured out cardiac rhythms, which made pacemakers possible. He organized the Royal Society Evolution meeting in November of 2016. Great guy. And then the founder of Hero X, which is hosting our prize, or the president, Christian Cotticini, he said, Perry, you know, everybody knows you're a Christian guy, and people are going to want to dismiss this thing as some kind of like creationist Trojan horse. And he goes, I know this is really serious, and believe me, it took a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of bureaucracy to get this thing going. And he said, you need to go get somebody from the other side to be on your judging team. So Michael Ruse is a very famous atheist. He's a philosopher of science at Florida State University, specializes in the philosophy of biology. He's testified in court trials about creationism and different stuff. He's a wonderful, delightful guy, and so he's also on my judging panel. And so the judge's job is to, you know, mediate any disagreements or make sure everybody is honest. And so I also believe many breakthroughs that Silicon Valley seeks are already solved in the cell. I think there's all kinds of problems in logistics and computer technology and self-driving cars and who knows what else. They've already been solved in biology, and we just need to go look at what's going on and see how we can apply it. And we just need to look in the microscope. You can post your entries at herox.com/evolution 2.0, and the site is hosted by the sister company, the X Prize Foundation. It's called Hero X. It's kind of like X Prize for anybody, and so we have a $5 million prize announced at that site. And then one last rule about the DM. What are the rules of the demilitarized zone? Well, here's what they are. Number one, put down your weapons. If we're going to talk about this, you don't come with the intention of shooting somebody dead, even if you don't like them, even if they're from a different tribe than you. We have to talk. Number two, no hiding behind screen names. I find that anonymity brings out the absolute worst in people. If you have to sign your name to what you're saying online or offline, then you're a lot more likely to say something that's sensible. Number three, assume positive intention. You need to assume that whoever you're talking to is there for a good reason. Even if you don't like their values, or even if you don't like their position or their platform or the tribe that they belong to, or their metaphysics or their anti-metaphysics or whatever, you assume they are here because they want to solve this, and there's a good reason why they believe what they believe, even if you think it's nutty. And number four, a phrase I got from my colleague Ari Galper, who's a sales trainer: get to the truth, not the sale. I just want to know the truth. Okay, so everybody knows that if you go to a car lot and the person just wants to sell you a car, regardless of whether it's the right car for you, that you have this icky used car salesman experience. Why? Because the guy is trying to get the sale, not to the truth. You respect a guy who doesn't sell you a car because he knows it's not right for you. Well, that's what we have to do in this debate, is we have to pursue the truth, and ignore no verifiable facts. And I believe that your will to discover the truth has to be greater than your fear of whatever that truth might be. Thank you very much. It's been great talking. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Perry. You've thrown out a lot of challenges there, and I'm sure there'll be questions. And can we try to keep the questions short and keep the questions and not statements?
Got one in the back there.
Yeah, a quick question. You said nothing about all the work that's going on in artificial intelligence research.
So we do have a microphone. Alexa, would you be able
The question was, you haven't talked about anything going on in artificial intelligence research. So,
And the reason I'm mentioning this is because I thought in that particular area of research, you're using heuristics which attempt to mimic some of the processes of evolution, where they're self-corrected processes, right? Isn't this a promising approach in your mind?
well, I'm all for AI research. I'll make two observations. Number one, AI, as far as I've ever seen, is not actually anything like the intelligence of living organisms. Organisms have a whole dimension of behavior that algorithms don't have, as far as I can tell. And secondly, I'm trying to get underneath that question and go, how do you get symbolic information in the first place? How do you get semantic information if you're only starting with chemicals? And all AI systems already have code built in, which is fine as far as it goes, and God bless them, but it doesn't answer this question. I think this is a very, very fundamental question that nobody has solved so far.
You've seen the work by Daniel Dennett, I take it.
Little bit.
Okay, I'm a bit surprised you haven't included him since he's devoted about 50 years to exactly the same.
Well, he hasn't solved this problem, I can tell you that. So, yes?
Do you have a video?
I have to find out.
Whilst you're doing that, do we have any other questions? Gentleman in the middle there. Yes. There's a microphone that will reach you in just a second. I don't know if you can multitask, Perry. Can you find the video at the same time?
Okay, the video is working, so shall we play
Let's
it?
take the video first, and then we'll take your
Okay.
How are your own thoughts different from a Google search? Google matches patterns, but it's unaware of you or itself. Our brains also match.
I'm sorry.
Oh, man.
How are your own thoughts different from a Google search? Google matches patterns, but it's unaware of you or itself. Our brains also match patterns, but our minds are aware of both ourselves and others. This awareness empowers us to make choices. Computers don't choose, they obey pre-made rules. Minds make and break the rules. Somehow, our minds bridge the gap between passive chemicals and creative code. If the origin of life on Earth is a valid science, then this must be possible. Earth somehow made the jump from chemicals to code. But how? Where did the first cell get its plan? And how do you get a code without designing one? It's time to find out. A private equity investment group known as Natural Code LLC has funded a technology prize to reward the first person who can solve origin of information. There is no industry that won't be impacted by this. There is no human being who won't enjoy its benefits, but it must be a real experiment, and it must produce a code with nobody having to design one. If you discover it and we can together patent it, you will receive a multi-million-dollar financial reward. Your name will go down in history for having discovered a landmark of 21st century science and one of the most pivotal new technologies of our age. Apply your ingenuity and let's solve this. Together, we'll develop it to its full potential and license it to the world. Follow this challenge and you'll get regular updates on our progress.
Right. Well, we have our marching orders. So, your question, please.
Okay. By the way, you're great when you're speaking marketing, but this takes you to a whole level, a different level on your enthusiasm and all that. So, anyway, in reading your book and different things, I kept thinking about Carter Mead, and who made many leaps in chip technology and so forth, and also developing biologically based inventions like for hearing aids and vision and so forth. And he made a switch over to analog for quite a while in order to advance what he was doing. But I noticed and I even called his office to see if he was interested in this presentation.
Really?
Anyway, yeah, not that I know him, but I can't. Anyway, so, but on your little form, you say it's got to be digital, not analog. I'm just wondering what you mean by that, because I'm thinking, well, maybe there's something in the analog world that could help break open what it is you're looking for.
So I'm originally an analog guy, and I know analog circuit design. I've done audio stuff, and I love analog stuff. But first of all, DNA is digital code. It's not, the genetic code isn't analog. And so we have a real problem there. Secondly, I don't know of a way to define an analog version of this that would be rigorous where you can definitively say whether you've solved this or not. Because of its digital nature, whether somebody solved it or not is very, very black and white. It's binary. You either solved this thing and you met the specification, or you didn't. DNA meets the specification all the way through it, right? If you could get ASCII code to somehow self-organize, or if you could get Morse code to self-organize, it would totally fit. And so it's because this is the fundamental problem that hasn't been solved. And like, I think it's as fundamental as something like relativity or gravity or electromagnetism. I mean, this is a very fundamental question, which is why I'm at the Beyond Center, because they like stuff like that.
Of course, we do recognize that life uses analog information processing
Absolutely,
well.
yes.
Totally. But as you say, it's not as sharply defined.
Well, the thing I thought of is when he was talking, supposing he made like the biggest breakthrough in digital photography, a number of years ago, but when he did it, he actually produced the images through analog processing, and then he converted the analog image to digital to be able to transmit it. So I don't know enough about this to know what I'm talking about.
Well, I can tell. So I've worked with lots of analog people in my career and lots of digital people in my career, and I would say that the people that have done the most interesting things with digital systems have usually been people who understood analog stuff really, really well. And going back and forth, because analog has those gray areas. Okay, so it could be that whoever solves this actually starts with some analog thing, and I mean, I don't know, but that's a great. Thank you for a great question.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Who else has a question? There you go.
So a lot of the proof of evolution comes from, like you said, a whale with miniature legs or something, or a freshwater fish becoming a saltwater fish, but I don't. It's interesting because if this programming thing is accurate, it doesn't seem over anything that we've ever found to apply to a species changing from one species to a different species. It applies. I think it's kind of more like an adaptation versus an evolution, because evolution inherently says that a species changes from one species to a different species. A bird to change to a fish, or ape to change to a person. But like, it feels like adaptation is definitely something that happens within every species, and they do change and evolve, or whatever you want to call it, but that doesn't feel like that's actually evolution. Evolution seems like something else.
Right, so a lot of people frame this as micro versus macro evolution, and so in Evolution 2.0, I frame this as the Swiss Army knife of 5 evolutionary mechanisms. So epigenetics, transposition, horizontal gene transfer, symbiogenesis, and hybridization. And those, as far as I can tell, are the major drivers of evolution. Viruses always also come into that. Well, so the first 3 I mentioned are all more or less gradual changes. But the last 2, so symbiogenesis is merger acquisitions. Okay, so a chloroplast in a plant cell is actually an algae living in a eukaryotic cell. Okay, so it's like a Starbucks in a Marriott. Okay, and it's the world's most successful merger acquisition. I mean, it's the best one in history. Okay, now I've got a friend named Quan Zhang from the University of Tennessee, and he actually did a real-life symbiogenesis experiment. I believe it was amoeba and X bacteria, and he put them together. They fought like cats and dogs for 18 months, and most of them died. But then they merged, and the bacteria were living inside the amoeba. The bacteria gave up some of their DNA. The amoeba gave up some of their DNA. They consolidated common functions the same way it happens in a corporate merger acquisition, and he had a completely new organism. And the definition of a symbiotic merger is that if you separate the two, they both die. And they did, okay? So he did this in 18 months. Now, symbiogenesis theory has actually been around since roughly 1870 or 1880. There's a fascinating book by Boris Kozo-Polyansky. It was written in 1924 in Russia. And then this was almost completely lost. And then in I think 67 or something like that, Lynn Margulis fought this giant uphill battle just to get the idea reintroduced to the West, and she submitted to 15 science journals, and they all turned her down, and they all thought she was crazy, and now she's a legend, okay? And so there's a whole multiple series of symbiotic mergers that seem to be in the history that gets us to where we are. And then you have hybridization. So weed plus emmer wheats plus goat grass equals modern wheat, which is a doubling of chromosomes. It's a new species by any fair definition. And so what you might look at, there's something called Ono's 2R hypothesis, which says that multiple rounds of genome duplications got us from invertebrates to vertebrates to jawed vertebrates, and the genetic record shows this. And so you don't hear much about this because the creationists think that evolution is a hoax, so they don't tell you about this stuff. And most of the neo-Darwinists think that evolution is random, accidental, and gradual, and so they don't tell you about it. And the real news story, I mean, I think the way evolution actually works is the biggest untold story in modern science. And when people find out about this stuff, like I can be at a wedding and somebody can ask me, and 10 minutes later everybody's leaning forward in their chairs going, oh my word, really? I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And I've never seen anything capable of producing such a sense of wonder. I mean, I suppose the Goldilocks Enigma might be right there up there. But and so I would challenge the assertion that you can't get new species. You can, and botanists do it every day.
So to be fair to modern biologists, I think they recognize that you can have gradual drift to a point where
yes.
You're really talking about two species. And you can also have these great leaps, and there are arguments among them as to the relative importance of those two. But I think both mechanisms are recognized. Kim, have I said anything stupid?
No.
I had a great conversation with Kim today. It we need to have more. So, who else has a question? Got several hands up.
We've got a few minutes that we need to be on here. Sorry, Alex.
Raise your hands high.
Microphone. First of all, to the nearer person, and you can pass it on down.
Thanks for a great talk. How important is that 1, 2, 3 argument that you spawned the big debate with to now? The reason, when I look at that, it looks to me like that's a logical fallacy.
I think you skipped
Give you an
it.
example.
Oh.
I'm just wondering because
Yeah, this guy. Well, all right, so you've actually got, so therefore DNA is designed, well, there's really 5 possible options. Humans designed DNA, aliens designed DNA, DNA occurred randomly and spontaneously, there's an unknown law of physics, or there's God.
Right, so there's more than 3. So you
Yeah,
missed
so
out
this,
the one that interests me. There's an unknown law of physics.
right, and what I thought was interesting when I first got into this was that there weren't more people saying, hey, what about number 4? And that's a completely fair answer, and at any point along the way, anywhere in my personal evolution, I would have accepted that. I would have just said, well, okay, so what is it? And so I found, it's not super productive in my experience, and I have a lot of it now, to like put somebody in some kind of headlock and say, well, see, you got to believe in God. Like, that doesn't really work, okay? What I think this does, 2 comments. First of all, I think the worst answer is it happened randomly, spontaneously, and accidentally. I think that is a terrible answer. It's anti-scientific, and no thinking person should accept it. I think that the success of whatever you're going to do with this is going to be predicated on a belief that the universe is structured and orderly, and that the equations are beautiful, and some of these things that we find in science. And so I find that at the edges of these debates, you always have the people that think, well, the next layer is just going to be chance and chaos, versus the people that go, no, the next layer is even going to be more orderly than the ones we already know. And I'm voting for that. And that's where I believe that a theological point of view helps science instead of hurting it. Yeah, next, who's got this gentleman right here has a question.
You may have just answered it, but I'll try again, which is, in your view, is the origin of DNA the only designed component, and then everything after that follows from the existence of DNA, and so evolution as a sort of feature of the natural world stemmed from this originally designed code?
That's a great question. So I think a lot of people would say that. Like, a lot of people say, if you have replication, variation, and selection, you will have evolution. My experience is no, you will not. Those conditions are necessary but not sufficient. You also have to have a couple other things. You have to have error correction in order to get evolution, and you have to have some kind of linguistic structure that follows ergodic patterns so that you're not just adding more noise to the signal. And so Erwin Schrödinger had this concept he called negative entropy. He wrote about in the 40s. And it was just basically the idea that organisms organize, right? They make things orderly, right? It's like, okay, I want to eat this food and I don't want to eat that food, and that's negative entropy. Well, I think that you can think of evolution as negative entropy squared. Okay, so not only do we not know really where codes come from, we also don't know how you make a system that self-evolves and self-evolves and self-evolves. They're very hard to make in an engineering sense. And I think we need to understand both of those questions, and I suspect that both questions are intertwined.
So Perry, the problem with these sorts of arguments is that it's very hard to see how all this sort of came into existence.
Right.
And there may be laws and principles we don't yet know. I mean, it may be less than something as universal as the law of gravitation, but it might be something that applies in complex systems, and we're working on all that in the Beyond Center.
Yes.
But even if we make progress on that, it may still be that the operation of these principles takes millions and millions of years.
It could be.
And then it's hard to know where to go with that, because it's a long time to win your prize.
Right.
If it turns out that the answer to this is just something that is very slow, and biologists had billions of years to, or chemists had billions of years to solve this problem, then we're going to be stuck. And it's really frustrating to think we might not get to the bottom of this, because it's going to be some effect that is just really slow. You're in the same situation with cosmology. Maybe there's a force which is so weak we just don't notice it in daily life, but it will come to dominate in trillions and trillions of years. But
Yeah.
we can't stick around for long enough to know it. So that's just a spoiler, really. I don't know that, and I really hope that we will get to the bottom of this with effects that can be demonstrated in the lab in my lifetime.
Yeah, well, I agree with everything you said, and two comments. One, the fact that organisms can evolve very, very fast, to me seems to be at least suggestive that maybe we don't have to wait, millions of years to solve this. And I also think there's just value in defining the problem really clearly.
That's why what you're doing, coming from outside of the sort of community that works in this building, is setting out in your own quaint language a challenge that we all need to address, because I think the origin of coded information processing is an absolutely fundamental scientific problem, and we're very far from solving it, very far from even knowing how to frame it properly. And so it's really good for you to be putting scientists on the spot like this. And I'm sure there'll be people here that will want to say more. What I'm concerned about is that we've run out of time.